coming on the air with a bunch of new developments tonight, including the White House looking to set the record straight about what would happen if Russia invades Ukraine, which honestly looks a little like a coin flip at this point. Vladimir Putin may be on the brink of war, and the Biden administration looking to clean up, clarify, whatever you want to call it, the consequences. We've got one of the top White House communications advisors, Karine Jean-Pierre, joining us live in just a couple minutes. And then later, a very special backstory with NBC's team of White House journalists taking us behind the scenes of year one of the Biden administration and how they think it's going to be to cover year two. Plus, in more breaking news, Ivanka Trump is now responding to the House January 6th committee after lawmakers asked her to cooperate. They asked. They're not demanding it, not yet. We'll talk about what she is saying now, what the committee wants to know, and what could happen if she doesn't talk. And an NBC News exclusive you will only see here. The car of a missing mom found 4 years after she disappeared. So how is it that a group of scuba diving internet sleuths cracked a case when police apparently could not? We've got the emotional reaction from the family coming up. Plus, transgender athletes facing new rules from the NCAA that some slam as confusing. We're going to talk about how this does and does not change the game for some athletes coming up later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and with President Biden looking to lean in to year two of his presidency, which officially starts today, he's facing the reality of dropping poll numbers, higher inflation, and now a cleanup job, if you will, from his team after suggesting what could happen if there's a minor incursion from Russia into Ukraine. Here he is this morning.
If any assembled Russian units move across the Ukrainian border, that is an invasion. But it will be met with severe and coordinated economic response that I've discussed in detail with our allies, as well as laid out very clearly for President Putin.
The clarification from President Biden. But let's step back and take a look at the big picture, right? Because as we've talked about on the show, even just in the last 24 hours, people care about foreign policy. They also care about their money, the economy. They care about COVID and the pandemic. And right now, based largely on both of those issues, the president's approval rating is at just 43%. That's down 10 points from the beginning of his presidency. Against that backdrop, I want to bring in our Carol Lee, because Carol, today has been, I think, a day of the cleanups and the clarifications, as we keep saying. Explain why this matters, why it's so significant, and why viewers need to know about it.
Look, Hallie, this matters because the president came out and essentially said the quiet part out loud. He said several things that were highly consequential at a moment when his Secretary of State is over in the region in Europe trying to avert some sort of invasion by Russia into Ukraine. And so he said the main thing that really upset people is that what you noted, the minor incursion, this idea that he revealed that allies are not united, the U.S. and European allies, if Russia crosses the border in Ukraine, on how they would respond if it's something that's relatively small or not a full-scale invasion. He's not going into the main cities and things like that. And that is a message to Putin that nobody wanted him to hear, because that essentially, according to the president's critics and even allies, that this is an invitation, in their view, for him to cross the border.
There was also, some back and forth and some clarification on this idea that the president may have some concerns about the legitimacy of the midterm elections. The White House is saying, no, you misheard that. That's not what he meant at all.
Yeah, they're basically saying, no, look at 2020. He didn't mean that. He was talking about how if these voting laws aren't passed, that the things that former President Trump tried to do in various states could have happened and an election could be overturned. His answer was look, on the Ukraine issue, the president said what he wanted to say, and he meant it. And on this issue, he seemed to just deliver a very confusing answer that quickly drew criticism, and the White House had to step in and, again, clean it up.
And again, we talk about the backdrop of it, right? And listen, the president said just 24 hours ago he doesn't always believe the polls, right? You can't live and die based on the poll numbers. At the same time, they are, I think, in some ways, a reflection of where the American public is. And it's a gut check, as he's transitioning from year one to year two. What are you hearing from your sources behind the scenes at the White House about how they're looking at some of these sinking approval ratings from President Biden?
Look, there's a lot of concern about it. They're trying to figure it out and fix it. However, there's not full panic about the polls in the sense that they feel like if they can get him to a better place in a few months, particularly get COVID under control, maybe get something passed where Americans can feel a little bit better about their lives, like universal pre-K, for instance, something like that, then he'll start to be on a better footing. And their argument is also that he's not selling what is in the bills that he has passed, including that infrastructure bill.
That's right.
So you'll see him out there trying to do more things like that.
Carol Lee joining us live from just outside the White House. Carol, great to have you as always on the show. Thank you.
Thanks,
Joining
Hallie.
me now from a little bit closer to the West Wing of the White House is White House Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Karine, it's great to see you. Good evening, and thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And congratulations on the new show.
Thank you so much. We're 2.5 months in. This is your big debut. I appreciate it. So listen, a lot of topics to get to. And let me start on Ukraine and Russia, because as you know, President Zelensky of Ukraine tweeted today in English, "We want to remind the great powers that there are no minor incursions or small nations." Listen, I know that President Biden, based on what we heard today, has not spoken with President Zelensky directly since this news conference, since the subsequent cleanup, as we just talked about. Are there plans in the works, Karine, for these two to speak soon?
I don't have anything right now to predict for you at this time on a conversation between the two of them. But as we know, and I know you've been following this very closely, Secretary Blinken was in Ukraine this week. We've had high-level staff conversation with members, with folks, high-level staff as well in Ukraine. So that has continued. That will continue as we move forward. Last week, we had 3 strategic diplomatic conversation. Look, we have been very clear. The president has been very clear with President Putin directly in these conversations that he has had. And he has been very clear in saying to President Putin that if Russia military troops cross over the border into Ukraine, that is an invasion, and there would be severe consequences, economic consequences. And these conversations that we've been having as well has been with our partners and allies abroad. So this has been a very unified front here, and we have been very clear. The president himself has been very clear with President Putin on this.
Let me ask you about free and fair elections here, because we know that, I believe Jen Psaki, your colleague, said today the president is absolutely not predicting that the 2022 elections would be illegitimate, but he's pointing out concerns over how the former president, Donald Trump, is trying to basically undermine confidence in the system with his lies about fraud. So let me just ask this very clearly, as it stands right now. And it's a yes or no question, and I know that's sometimes awkward, but I got to ask it. Does the White House have confidence right now, as things stand now, in the midterm elections this year?
Yes, we do. The president does. And just to give a little bit more of color here, what the president was trying to say, he's actually trying to say the opposite of his statement, of the answer that he was giving, which was in 2020, what we saw was the opposite of that, right? In the middle of COVID, in the middle of everything that we're going on, we saw an election that was done the right way, that delivered a democracy, if you will. And it was very important to see that in the middle of COVID, in the middle of voter suppression during that time as well. What he was talking about was the big lie that we have seen. And we've seen that, as you know, across the country in 19 states, the voter suppression as well. But what the president was trying to do, the former president was trying to do in trying to get people to overthrow the elections and results back in 2020. That's the former president of the administration before us. So that's what he was talking about. The big lie that has really seeped into states across the country with these 19 states doing these voter suppression laws.
I've talked with voting rights experts about the importance of the Electoral Count Act and potential reforms there. I realize that is not the sweeping voting rights package the president wanted, but that thing looks, that's dead, right? So right now, given what's happened over the past 24 hours, would this White House support some of the Electoral Count Act reforms that we're starting to see bubble up on a bipartisan basis?
Well, this is the thing that we're trying to really point out and make sure that the American people understand, and they do understand this, which is voter suppression. We have to deal with that right now. We have to make sure that free and fair elections are still exist. That's part of our democracy. We have to make sure that people can go out and be able to vote and not have the obstacles that have been presented in front of them in 19 of these states. And that's what our focus is. So the president has been disappointed, as he has said himself, by what we saw last night in his statement, but he's not deterred. He's going to continue to fight, and he's going to continue to make sure that we get voting rights legislation done, something that he has done his whole entire career.
Okay,
so that's what we want to see as a major focus here as well.
So then would he support changes to the Electoral Count Act?
You know, that is something that's still working through Congress. We're going to let leadership deal with that specifically, as as I said, it's getting worked through. What we were trying to focus on, as the president and the vice president talked about in Georgia, is the Voting Rights Act and getting that passed, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the assault that we're seeing right now across the state in these 19 states.
I know you have a tight schedule. I got to ask you very quickly about this new NBC News polling, which I can only assume that you have seen at this point. But I want to dig into one piece of it, which says more than half the country, based on this poll, 53% of people gave the president poor marks for being able to unite the country. We know that unity, listen, we all were there for the inaugural address from President Biden a year ago today. That was a key focus of it. What happened? Why do you think that message is not getting through to the American people?
Well, look, the president understands it's going to take some time. He talked about this a little bit yesterday during the press conference and has talked about it before. It's going to take time. You know, this is 1 year. This is something that he wants to do. He's talked about being a president, not just for Democrats, but for Republicans, for independents, wanting to unify the country. As we all know, that's what saving the soul of this nation, unifying the country, was one of the main reasons he jumped in to the primary back in 2019. And so he's going to continue to do that. He's going to continue to work for all Americans. But we understand it's going to take time. It's going to take some time, especially after the last 4 years and how polarizing it was then, and it still is now.
Karine Jean-Pierre, we are glad to have you here on the show 1 year into the Biden presidency. Please come back. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Got some other breaking news tonight. Ivanka Trump, the former president's daughter, responding today to the Select Committee's request, the Select Committee investigating January 6th, for voluntary testimony about what exactly does she know about what went down on January 6th. Here's the deal. A spokesperson for Ivanka Trump says she is aware of the request, but she hasn't said yes to it. She hasn't said no either. And the Select Committee got really specific about what they're looking for. That was what was sort of really interesting about this. They want any information that she has about a phone call on the morning of January 6th, where former President Trump tried to persuade former Vice President Mike Pence to reject the certified electoral votes. They want to know what she knows about Mr. Trump's actions, or frankly, inaction that day, whether Mr. Trump gave an order to deploy the National Guard or not, and the White House push to persuade the former president to avoid talking about election fraud allegations. I want to bring in now Leanne Caldwell. Leanne, there is a lot you can read from this, right? So first things first, we have to note that this is voluntary. This was a rather, I talked with one person today who used the word solicitous letter, sort of saying, please give us this information, not you must give us this information. Yeah. Seems a little bit unlikely, at least at this point, that she may cooperate, given that her father has instructed others not to cooperate, although we just don't know at this point.
We don't know, Hallie, and that's the thing. You know, Ivanka Trump was not only a close advisor to the former president, but she's his daughter, so putting her in an extra particularly difficult situation. But who knows? Maybe we do know that she had a lot of concerns leading up to January 6th, and especially on January 6th from this testimony and from things, or from this letter and from other things that had been reported. And so maybe she does want to tell her side of the story. And it's important to know that she is not the person who is the center of the investigation. They just want to get information from her because she was close to him on that day, Hallie.
What do you see when you look at that list of bullet points of the very specific information that the January 6th Select Committee wants to know? What does that tell you about the direction that their investigation is going?
Yeah, it tells me that they want to know exactly what the former president's state of mind was, what actions he took on that day, what he said to the former vice president, and also what he did regarding the National Guard. In this letter, it says that they got sworn testimony from the former acting defense secretary, Chris Miller, saying that he never got a request from the former president to call in the National Guard. And so they just need some more information about that, and they've asked Ivanka to give it to him.
I have to talk about this. I mean, listen, she is, I think, for people to remember, and you know, I covered that family for a very long time, you know, during their time in the White House. She was a White House advisor, right? She was officially on the payroll working for former President Trump. She was one of his closest confidants. I mean, this is somebody who I would say, you know, among the Melania Trump, Ivanka Trump, I would maybe put Hope Hicks in a category just outside that, right? His longtime other advisor. She knows what went down. She was with her father quite a bit in those days leading up to and on the 6th. I think that's important to remember here.
Yeah, and she was with him on the days leading up to the 6th and on January 6th. And what we found out in this letter is that White House aides went to her when they were unable to get to the former president to ask him to call things off on that day when the mob was in the Capitol. They thought that she might be able to do it. And that's something that's really interesting, is that other White House officials have already testified, and part of it is saying that they thought Ivanka Trump could help their case.
Leanne Caldwell, live for us on Capitol Hill. Leanne, feels like we're talking to you every day with breaking news on the Hill, so let's see what tomorrow holds 24 hours from now. Thank you, friend. We also just learned this afternoon that the Fulton County District Attorney in Georgia has asked for a special grand jury to investigate alleged 2020 election fraud by former President Trump and others. This is really interesting. Here's the deal. The DA, her name's Fani Willis, wants a judge to let this happen because this special grand jury would be able to subpoena witnesses. And she says so far, several witnesses have refused to cooperate if they're not being compelled to. We don't know a ton about the specifics of this investigation, but we do know from an interview with the Associated Press earlier this month that the DA confirmed its scope includes phone calls, like the one between former President Trump and the Georgia Secretary of State, in which the former president asked the secretary to find the votes to overturn the legitimate election results. Remember that call? He said, find the votes, 11,000 plus votes. Raffensperger says in an interview that actually just came out a couple minutes ago that the DA is, quote, trying to score cheap political points, but he did say he would comply if he is compelled legally to do so. The former president, in a statement today, defended that call, as he has so often before, as perfect, and suggested the grand jury investigate his claims about what he calls large-scale voter fraud that, by the way, does not exist, as has been proven by multiple recounts, including hand recounts in the state of Georgia. To other news tonight, the weather. I bet you're feeling it. I bet no matter where you're watching from, you're feeling a little chillier than normal because temperatures, they are getting down to some dangerous lows tonight as we see this southern storm start to take shape. You've got 23 million of us under winter weather warnings from Texas to the Carolinas. Look at Texas, right? Yesterday, they were chilling in the 70s and 80s. It was pretty sweet. Now, you've got parts of the state going below freezing. Look at this billboard in Dallas. It turned into an icy waterfall as the temperatures took a tumble. The overnight lows, 19 degrees in Amarillo, 29 in Houston. And that system, by the way, it's on the move. It could bring ice to the south and parts of the mid-Atlantic. I want to bring in who I would like to call a friend of this show, Al Roker, because you are always here on News Now delivering for us, man. I appreciate you. Talk to us about it, because this severe weather was from Florida up the East Coast last weekend. More on the way.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. I mean, we are looking at top and bottom almost. We've got something going on in the south, something to the north, and a little bit of everything in between for our friends. So let's start off with this storm in the south. So it's going to develop. Snow and ice will be developing from Georgia to the Carolinas, with strong storms for central Florida and southern Florida for tomorrow. By tomorrow evening, you can see that area of pinkish. That's the mixed precip. To the north, we've got snow, and to the south, in the northern panhandle, we're looking at rain. Now, Saturday, this moves off the coast, tracks off, but then cold air will be settling into the mid-Atlantic. But take a look at this ice forecast. We're talking upwards of a ½ an inch of ice along the North Carolina coast, a tenth of an inch back on into southeastern Georgia. We're talking about dangerous driving conditions, power outages, airport delays, a real mess right in that region. Now, we move to the north. 13 million people under wind chill advisories stretching from the Dakotas all the way to New England. We're talking about wind chills as low as 35 below zero. Frostbite can occur within minutes. Right now, it feels like 8 in Chicago and Detroit, 7 in Pittsburgh, -9 in Minneapolis, a wind chill with an air temperature of 2. St. Louis, it feels like 6. Tomorrow, that cold air extends as far south, Raleigh, Memphis, with wind chills in Cleveland of 14, 19 in D.C., -6 in Burlington, Vermont. And then we got a couple of clippers coming across, Hallie. This Arctic front will cross the northern plains. It'll develop snow for the Dakotas and Minnesota. Saturday, it rotates. Snow showers rotate around the Great Lakes with some lake effect snow. And then there's a new clipper coming out on Sunday, and that cold air is going to be reinforced. We're talking back through the plains in the upper Midwest, anywhere from 2 to 8 inches of snow, Hallie. So we are in the throes of winter. The next 6 to 10 day outlook for temperatures as far as the eastern half of the country, way below normal. But the National Weather Service just releasing the February outlook. We flipped the switch, and it looks like at least the eastern half of the country is going to be warmer than average for February. Punxsutawney Phil has his work cut out for him.
He sure does. Al Roker, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow morning on the Today Show for the latest. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
George Floyd's legal team says today is another milestone in their fight for justice. That's because 3 former Minneapolis police officers who were with Derek Chauvin in May of 2020 when he pressed his knee into Floyd's neck started their federal trial. Jury selection has started for Thomas Lane, J. Alexander King, and Tu Tao, who are pleading not guilty to charges of violating Floyd's constitutional rights. Basically, what that means is they saw that George Floyd needed help, but didn't do anything about it. That's the claim. The judge wants this trial to go as fast as possible because of COVID, right? They want to get the jury seated in just 2 days. Remember, for Derek Chauvin, it took 2 weeks to seat the jury. You probably remember that George Floyd's murder reignited this national conversation about race and policing, fueling protests all across the country. So as you might expect, there is a pretty strong police presence around the courthouse. Megan Fitzgerald is in St. Paul to us. And Megan, what's interesting here, I think a lot of people know the name Derek Chauvin. They know the video that we kept seeing everywhere, right? Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd. That trial was played live on cable networks across this country. But there were 3 other people, right? 3 ex-officers who were also involved in that day.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, what you remember most, obviously, is the actions of Derek Chauvin. Certainly that was the focus of this trial that commenced in the spring. But like you mentioned, 3 other officers. Let's start with Tu Tao. He is the officer who you see in that video who's trying to keep the people who are coming, the bystanders, at bay, even confronting a woman who identified herself as a first responder and who was pleading to try and render aid to George Floyd. You saw Tao trying to keep her back. Then when you look at the people who were holding down George Floyd, to the left of Derek Chauvin, holding down his torso, was J. Alexander King. And then to the left of him was Thomas Lane, holding down his legs. And so, as you know, Hallie, ample video here of different angles. Right. And you can bet that jurors will be taking a look at this throughout this trial.
Any color, Megan, to use some news speak, any insight into them in court today, what we saw from them, what that was like inside the room?
Yeah, so, of course, a limited amount of people that are allowed inside the courtroom because of rules, because of COVID. But what we know based off of the journalists who are inside the courtroom is that Tu Tao looked straight ahead. He didn't really look around much. We know that Jay Alexander King and Thomas Lane sort of looked around, making eye contact with jurors that were potential jurors, we should say, that were being seated and walking inside of the room, Hallie.
What is the expectation sort of protest-wise, right? Because we know, as we talked about, there is a police presence. I think there's fencing, around the courthouse, et cetera. What's the vibe there, Megan?
Well, we saw a small group of people that gathered out here calling for these officers to be convicted. We know that the energy is running high here. A lot of people are going to be focusing on this trial, and police realize that, and so they are preparing for the worst. Are they expecting protests? Well, they're not saying that they are, but they're preparing in the event that people start to come out, certainly throughout the course of this trial. So as you mentioned, there's fences that have been put up around the federal courthouse behind me here. There's streets that have been blocked off, and police say throughout the course of the trial, they're going to be increasing police presence here in St. Paul in the event that we do see protests and riots. Hallie.
Megan Fitzgerald live for us there in St. Paul. Megan, I'm sure we'll be talking again probably as soon as next week. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, Peloton. Have you heard about this? Hitting pause on making more bikes and treadmills. Why? Not enough people want them, apparently. We'll talk about what this means for this extremely previously popular company after a rough couple of months. Peloton. Have you heard about this? They are pushing in that crank knob, getting ready to slow things down. If you ride the bike, you get that, right? That's how you actually slow the bike down. Peloton is slowing down its production of some of its bikes and treadmills. It's actually going to stop it altogether for now. Why? Because demand has gone way down, and Peloton's trying to save some money here. That's according to new internal documents that CNBC got their hands on. Apparently, Peloton has seen, quote, a significant reduction everywhere because of how expensive some of its products are and because more and more people are trying to compete with the Pelly. Yikes, markets. They did not like this news. Look at the stock tank here after this news came out. Peloton, boy, have they had an eventful year or what? We've talked about it a little bit on this show because it was a pandemic darling initially. Remember when everybody was working from home? People were hopping on their bikes in their basements instead of going to the gym. But then you had some issues that came up. I want to bring in Lauren Thomas, who broke this story today. What a scoop, Lauren, from CNBC. She is joining us now. Congratulations, because, boy, this is big news, right? That Peloton is going to stop making bikes for 2 months, stop its treadmills for like a month and a half. What is the deal?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. And again, like you said, very volatile trading in the stock this afternoon since that story broke. Essentially, what Peloton is facing here is a total reset, right? Like you said, its supply is far outweighing demand at this point in time. And, you know, about a year and a half ago, that equation was
totally inverted.
Totally
right.
reversed.
People were waiting weeks and weeks and weeks to get their bikes. You know, it's taken forever.
Exactly. So, yeah, Peloton is planning to halt production of its bike and its tread. It's actually already paused production of the Bike Plus. Again, this is just a temporary move to ultimately, hopefully, reset those inventory levels to be more in line with the demand that they are seeing. But you know, I gotta say, it's really tough. This company is in a position, of course, it's trying to gauge demand and forecast what it might be seeing in the future. But for such a sizable chunk of its business, right, it's seen just these huge fluctuations of customers, you know, rushing in at the onset of the pandemic to buy its bikes. You know, as a result, it didn't have enough supply early on. It actually had to invest a ton of money in manufacturing capabilities, you know, additional production facilities, things of that nature to allow it to just make enough bikes and treadmills for customers. But now it's at this point today, you know, where that demand isn't what it was saying early on. And as a result, you know, it really has to right size the ship in a lot of ways. And it's trying to do that by again, pausing these production levels.
What I think is so interesting about this company is that, you know, we are talking about it not on CNBC, right? But it is a cultural phenomenon. Like Peloton has become a cultural phenomenon. You look at what other company can you think of, right? There's a few, but whose commercials make news when they're controversial or Sex and the City appearances. You know, we don't even do that. Like this is something that is, whether you have a Pelly or not, it's like a bit of a cultural touchstone for people all around the country.
Totally. And I mean, I think you make a great point, and it's something that's totally worth highlighting with this news. Peloton still has a massive base of paying customers, you know, people
every
that
month,
own a bike.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. They're paying every month that fee to access content. And we haven't seen churn levels, that rate of people leaving the business, essentially is what that is. We haven't seen those tick up, you know, in recent quarters. And Peloton has done a great job of holding on to people once they're in the ecosystem, right? So I think the big issue at stake right now, it's more future demand. You know, are there still more people out there, whether it's in the US or overseas, that want to purchase a bike or a treadmill in the future? That's more of the question mark. I think what we have seen and what Peloton has showed us is that, like you said, such loyal followings. You know, people wear the products. You see people walking around on the street in New York with the Peloton logo on a hoodie or a T-shirt, and that just speaks to the community that it's built. But at the same time, again, you know, investors and other folks are going to want to see that future growth.
Real quick, Lauren, do you think they can come back from this? Do you think they can recover?
I mean, I think they can. I think this is a moment in time. Again, it's more of a reset for them. Okay. We just, again, Peloton has been in the news. It's been making headlines when it's had this, you know, extraordinary levels of growth. And so that's what we're used to. It almost has to reset, I think, the, you know, consumers' expectation of the business too.
Lauren, it is so great to have you on. Thank you. Again, great reporting. We're so glad for you to share it with us tonight here on NBC News Now. Appreciate it. We've got an update to that hostage situation at the Texas synagogue we told you about earlier in the week. Turns out British police have arrested 2 men for questioning. We've got more details coming up in the 5 things. And a possible crack in a cold case after divers found the car of a woman who went missing 4 years ago in Texas. Antonia Hilton is standing by with some of the extraordinary details and how the victim's family is responding. Get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, an update to a story that broke as we were on the air last night. A Marine has now been charged in the crash that killed 2 service members and hurt more than a dozen more outside Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. State Highway Patrol officials say the 19-year-old driver was going too fast trying to make a turn and rolled over the truck. Number 2, there's also an update in the investigation of last week's hostage situation at a Texas synagogue. British police have arrested 2 men to be questioned, but they haven't said specifically how they're connected. The FBI says it's still looking into this whole thing as a terrorism-related matter. Number 3, Tonga is finally getting some of the help it needs 5 days after that volcano eruption and tsunami just covered everything in ash and debris. The first aid flight made it there today with things like water, generators, toiletries, etc. They actually managed to do contactless delivery to try to avoid COVID concerns. You thought it was just Instacart? Goes way beyond that. Number 4, a 19-year-old is now the youngest woman to fly alone all around the world. Zara Rutherford landed in Belgium today, 2 months later than planned because of weather. In just 5 months, she flew over 40 countries and 5 continents. How incredible. And number 5, a bit of a modern makeover for M&M's. The candy maker Mars is saying some of its chocolate characters are being tweaked, especially the lady ones, the female characters. Green, right? A little less sexy. The company says the redesign is to try to put out better gender representation in a more, in their words, dynamic and progressive world. You can check out some of the changes online already. It'll hit the actual packaging later on this year. Now to a story that you will only see here on NBC News. It's about a woman named Stephanie Torres. She was about to celebrate her 43rd birthday when she went missing in Texas 4 years ago. The case went cold until a company made up of online internet sleuths stepped forward wanting to help. And it came to this. NBC was there when a car was pulled out from a river yesterday. It turns out it was Torres's car. Human remains were found inside. They have not yet been positively identified. But as this moment unfolded, Torres's daughter, as you can imagine, was absolutely overwhelmed with emotion as she finally, it seems, got a little bit closer to some answers about what happened to her mom.
I wasn't expecting this.
Why didn't you reach out? And, your words were, I didn't think anybody would care. And the world cares. We care.
The owner of that company, Adventures with Purpose, these scuba diving internet sleuths, they've helped solve more than a dozen cold cases, and they do their work totally for free. Antonia Hilton is joining us now from Texas. Antonia, this is kind of an incredible story, and there's a lot of intersectionality here, right? Because this company started as like cleanup divers, and then they started searching for missing people. There are 600,000 people that go missing every year, and some of those families say there are, inequities in how the system treats them. The Torres family has some concerns about this too.
That's right. Look, the Torres family has for a long time insisted that their mother likely committed suicide, that she drove off that night, and they had tried to talk to police about this. They said actually that they would leave calls and voicemails for the detective assigned at the case and often not hear back. When you talk to the Waco PD, they say that they exhausted all their options and, the case dried up. Adventures with Purpose connected with Stephanie Torres's family this past December, exactly about 4 years after her disappearance. And they decided to take on her case. It fits the profile of the cases that this group of volunteers take comfort in taking on. They try to avoid anything that might involve foul play because they're just a group of volunteers, not law enforcement experts. But a case like Stephanie's is one that they feel very confident in. She reported, or her family reported, that she was suicidal in the days before her disappearance. She was struggling with fibromyalgia and extreme debilitating pain from her disease. And the children were saying that she said some of these statements right before leaving the house. And so their team of scuba divers and YouTubers believed that this large body of water not far from the home that they were all living in was very likely where a person, but also their large car, could disappear. Hallie?
What is interesting here is the way, and we have seen this, some similar things in other instances, people just working on the internet, right? This group has a huge YouTube following, right? They've got this major YouTube page. They're doing their work for free based on donations. What is their relationship like, for example, with the Waco PD, who were, the ones formally tasked with trying to figure this out?
Yeah, you know, Hallie, it's really interesting because it's a very delicate dance, I would say. They're not exactly collaborating. And the police are, of course, very protective of their own investigation and insist that they did everything that they could do. And then Adventures with Purpose sees themselves as a group that steps in when a family has no more options. These investigations dry up. The police are no longer answering the family members' phone calls, and then they can come to the scene, use the resources and the diving skills that they have to help. They've solved 16 cold cases this way, and Stephanie's story may well end up being their 17th. And so, you know, what I would say is, to give you kind of a sense of what it was like here on the ground, Adventures with Purpose got here early in the morning, right by this river. They went out on their own boats with their own gear, and within an hour found the car that matched Stephanie's car. And then they called the police, and the police came to the scene. And then the collaboration really began, where the two teams worked together to ultimately get that car out of the water. Take a listen to my conversation both with the detective who was here on the scene and on this case, and with the leader of Adventures with Purpose.
It's very difficult to keep the flame alive in cases like this. You know, detectives come and go, they change units, they promote, they retire. And so a lot of times that sort of connection can be lost.
Now their hands are tied. They're sitting on their hands. They don't know what to do. And so that's when, you know, we come in, and now we offer up our services.
You know, as you mentioned, 600,000 people go missing in the United States every year, and many of them are people of color. And their families consistently report that they feel as though they get less media attention and less police resources when their loved ones are gone. And so it's really fascinating, this story, because Adventures with Purpose represents a trend that we're seeing in our reporting here at NBC of groups, community organizations, people who are just stepping up and trying to give these families, this is a Mexican-American family here in Waco, options that they feel they're often just not given. And it's come years later, but what we heard on the ground from the Torres children was that they were just incredibly grateful to finally feel like a group of people really listened to them and came and gave it their all. Hallie?
I just have to ask if you can pull back the curtain a little bit, Antonia, because you were there for this really gut-wrenching and emotional moment for this family. Can you talk a little bit about how this story came about, what that was like for you there?
Well, this story came about because, you know, we now have a team here at NBC News that's really dedicated to trying to invest much more into these stories. You know, we first told a number of stories this year about missing and murdered Indigenous women, Black men and women, and now we're turning our attention toward cases like these, and not just people who have gone missing and there are no more solutions. We're trying to highlight groups like Adventures with Purpose that are stepping up in the void and trying to do something about this, and their work is really calling attention to the disparities that are there. So that's how we came to this story and decided to be here on the ground. In terms of what it was like here yesterday, Hallie, it was really one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen. It's kind of hard to put into words. I mean, watching two children here right by the water see their mother's car that they haven't seen in 4 years lift up, you know, they just broke down, and our entire team here was just blown away by their strength and by the team that was here to support them.
It is such important reporting, and I'm so glad that you're able to be here to share it with all of us. Antonia Hilton, thank you. We're going to see more of Antonia's reporting coming up tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. That, of course, is at 6:30 Eastern on NBC. And we should know, too, if you or a family member needs help, there are people there to help you. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK. Coming up here on the show. It's been a year since President Biden was sworn into office, and you know a lot has gone down. So for tonight's backstory, we've got a special version for you, a roundtable with 3 members of our White House team. They're going to tell us what it's like behind the scenes covering the Biden administration up close and personal. Plus, news never stops, and this reporter is living proof of it. Find out what happened after she was, hit by a car during a live shot. I got to tell you, she's okay, but we'll tell you more coming up after the break. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Midwest Bureau, actually a quick update on a story we just talked about, some breaking news as we've been on the air. That trial in St. Paul, you know, the one Megan Fitzgerald was covering just a minute ago, The jury in the trial against 3 officers at the scene of George Floyd's death back in May of 2020, that jury has been seated. It only started earlier today, so boy, that process really went quickly. They are pleading not guilty to charges of violating George Floyd's constitutional rights. We'll have more on that story as it develops. From our West Coast bureau, check out this dash cam footage. It's from a Tesla. It caught a dump truck, oh my Lord, doing a full flip in California. No idea what caused the crash, but somebody was taken to the hospital. It happened in the Studio City area. And from our D.C. bureau, look at this. A car plowing into Tori Yorgay, a reporter for our affiliate out in Huntington, West Virginia, while she was on live TV. We're about to show it here in just a second. It is actually really scary to watch. Ooh, it hits her. She gets back up. She finishes the live shot. She got checked out at the hospital. She is totally fine. This is her last week on the job. She's actually getting a new gig out in Pittsburgh. Oh, I don't want to show it again. That's too brutal to watch. I got to tell you, you might be wondering, why does that anchor not respond? He may not have been looking actually at the monitor. He may be looking at the camera, didn't know it happened. We should also say, listen, some of these local reporters are out there by themselves, as she was. This is scary stuff. So thank a local news reporter next time you see him. All right. I'll get off my soapbox and get over to the backstory. It's our behind-the-scenes look, as you know it, how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And tonight, you know, it is January 20th, right? 1 year exactly since President Biden took office. We were here 24 hours ago, together, all of us, after the president held that marathon press conference looking ahead to year 2. He talked COVID, the economy, Russia, his legislative agenda, and he's going to keep talking, of course, as he enters 2022. And with us now are also folks who we know like to talk about President Biden, the journalists who have covered him since the very beginning. Can I just take a moment to marinate in the 3 of you? Our director of the White House unit, Stacey Klein, on your left. Mike Memoli, our White House correspondent, in the middle. Our chief White House correspondent, Kristen Welker, over to the right side of your screen. This is a very special backstory edition. And gang, I think you know the drill here. This is like a scene. We really want to get behind the scenes. Tell us what your life is like for viewers who are watching you. And Stacey, in your instance, not watching you, but watching the fruits of your labors every single day. Welker, let me start with you. I know there is no typical day in the White House, right? But like, walk us through what looks like a typical day, and what you're doing is you're doing the Today Show and Nightly and MS and News Now and everything else.
Well, I think, Hallie, first of all, thank you for having us for this segment. We have been so excited about this.
I'm jazzed, dude. I'm ready.
Segment with you. I know. Well, obviously, you're an extended part of our team. We were all at the White House together under the Trump administration. You were the chief White House correspondent. So, look, the day is still nonstop. Of course, every single president has their own unique style of governing, and part of our jobs and part of the challenge, frankly, of covering any president is learning their schedule, but also learning how they think, how they react to things, what to be ready for, and really trying to look down the lane, never taking your eye off of the ball. So our alarms go off very early, typically at about 5 a.m. And we start not only reaching out to officials at the White House and beyond, our sources throughout Washington, but we also start preparing editorially for the day. How can we help our viewers? How can we help the American people understand the issues that Washington is debating, quite frankly? And what that has required, I think, in this administration is going deep into a lot of policy. And I think about it this way, Hallie. I went on maternity leave. We were talking about infrastructure. I came back 4 months later, and we were still talking about infrastructure. But there are so many details that you have to understand within that. And so it's a lot of delving into the policy. And as you know, top line, not just taking the White House for their word, making sure that we're talking to sources on Capitol Hill, to policymakers, and making sure that we're really drilling down on what the details are. And of course, a million live shots in between.
Including this one. So thank you for your service, my friend. Mem, listen, you're known around these parts as the Biden Whisperer. You are quite literally writing the book on him. We'll promote that as it gets closer to drop in. You covered him as a senator and a candidate now in the White House. Which job of his was the most fun for you to cover, and which has been the hardest?
Well, Hallie, I think as a former Hill reporter yourself, if you gave us a drink or two, we would probably admit that actually covering Capitol Hill is a lot of fun as a reporter. It's a big press corps, but a lot of access. And that was certainly the case with Senator Joe Biden, who loved to hold court in the halls of the Capitol. And even when I was covering him as Senator Joe Biden, but on the Obama ticket, he was acting a lot like a senator. Now, when he was vice president, it was a lot of access, pretty good access, in fact, but a small press corps. And I think that was really where sort of the whispering began for me, because I spent a lot of time with him as one of the few reporters, in some cases, traveling, for instance, to China for a week when he first went there to meet with then Vice President Xi Jinping. Both of them, of course, are now president. That's a really important relationship that we're still writing and talking a lot about. I was with him on the campaign trail so often. We went to a lot of Dairy Queens, and you know how I feel about Dairy Queen.
I know how
so,
you feel about ice cream, my
for,
sweet
for
friend.
us on the road.
I do.
And so seeing him as vice president when he didn't have the sort of huge bubble around him that he does now as president was really eye-opening. And that means, and that leads me to the hardest part, now that he's president. And I thought one of the most interesting moments from the press conference yesterday came in response to one of the 7 or 8 or 9 questions that Welker there was able to sneak into the president. And when the president really talked about his frustration about being president, that he's been stuck in Washington, that he's had a lot to do, that he doesn't get out, talk to the American people as much. And that's been the same experience for us as a reporter. I used to have pretty good access to the president, even in the campaign. During the pandemic, you would call up every once in a while. He's a very busy man now. It's a much different environment in the White House, and that makes covering him in the same way that I used to very hard.
Stacey P. Klein, you are somebody who I am intimately familiar with and was fortunate enough to see you every day for a number of years. Our viewers have no idea who you are, so I'm so excited to bring you forward. You are the... These are some hilarious photos we're showing by. You are the manager of this entire White House team, Stacey. You're the director of our unit. You are the one who is like behind the scenes, keeping the trains. It would literally fall apart without you. And Memoli and Welker, I know you agree with that. So, Stacey, bring us into some of this, because you are part of planning for foreign trips. You are making sure that, like, crews, staff, the cameras that go into the Oval Office to be able to bring us the president live. Like, explain to folks what that life is like behind the scenes.
Well, Hallie, it's never a dull moment. That's the short answer.
Yeah.
One of the most critical things about covering a White House, any president, is the logistics and the planning that go into it. As you mentioned, some people don't realize that. No one knows who I am. Hi, everyone. Here I am. My job, as you mentioned, is to make sure that the trains are running on time. Our mantra when we cover the White House is wherever the president goes, we go. And it's not always that simple. From a weekend in Wilmington to a stop at a factory in Detroit to a 6-stop foreign trip. A lot goes into it. It's not always easy. And remember, we don't work for the White House, we cover the White House.
That's right.
So we don't always have those intimate details, those really necessary pieces of information the second that we would like them. Ideally, we could have a week's lead time to plan an event, to plan covering the president when he goes somewhere. Sometimes we have as few as 24 or less hours. But our job, my job, is to make sure that we have someone from the White House team of NBC wherever the president is. And we go out before he gets there so that we can report on what he's about to do. Then we cover the event. And then when the president is on Air Force One flying home, we're still there and we're reporting so that we can bring Americans the story.
It's incredible stuff. You're all TV people, so when I say this, you'll understand. I have another segment to get to and 6 minutes left in the show, but I want to ask you more questions. So let's do a kind of a lightning round. You know, Mem, one of the things Stacey just said that's important, you don't work for the White House, you cover the White House. There's nobody probably in the country, Mem, who understands and knows President Biden as well as you. But you're also very clear out when you report about stuff that the White House may think is less than flattering. What is it like when you put out a story that the administration is not so thrilled about? How do you manage that?
Well, Hallie, Kristen and I are working on one of those stories right now. There's a story we're really taking a deep dive into how the West Wing really operates after year one. And I got to tell you, this week has been rough because I'm just getting call after call after call from the White House. And they're saying things like, you know better, you know, you've covered him a long time. And I have to remind them, first of all, I don't work for you, and I cover this guy as tough as I cover anybody. But secondly, I have better sources than even some of these White House staffers do, because I know and have relationships with people for a longer period of time. So, you know, they sometimes, you know, don't necessarily even realize who we're talking to and how good our sourcing is. And that's really an advantage, actually, in stories like the ones we're trying to put out now.
Stace, what has been, I think, the most memorable moment for you in the last year, working behind the scenes and watching our colleagues on the air doing what they do so well?
I think last night really is the epitome of everything that we work on a daily basis. Second presidential press conference for this president within a year, which is actually a small number. So much teamwork goes into everything that we do. Yesterday, Kristen was obviously in the press conference. She was prepared. She was polished. She was able to press the president with tough questions and follow-ups. And something that I know that she's happy for me to share with everyone is that was a team effort. Kristen, she does not need any coaching, any prep, but nobody goes into a room with the President of the United States cold. That is just not how it's done. We are so lucky to have such a great White House unit. Now, in the past, when you were part of it, Hallie, and those before even us, one of the best things about NBC's White House team is just teamwork. We all work together, and we take something from its infancy through plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G to Z until we implement it and we pull it off. And that's the most rewarding thing.
Welker, with 30 seconds left, what's the hardest part about being a White House correspondent to you?
The hardest part is that you have to be ready for anything every single day.
Yeah.
Quick anecdote in 30 seconds. I was walking out the door last year in February and all of a sudden got the alert on my phone at about 8 o'clock at night that we had launched strikes into Syria for retaliation of strikes that they believed, the U.S. believed, was launched at U.S. forces. And so I turned around and, of course, spent the next better part of 24 hours at the White House reporting on that, trying to get critical information out to the American people. So you really have to be ready for anything at any moment. And it is the teamwork that makes it work. Stacey is definitely the glue. But Hallie, you were, of course, a really big part of that teamwork when you were there. All of those prep sessions that we have that we love so much that carried on into this administration.
I don't know that I've ever heard you deliver an anecdote in 30 seconds, Welker, but you nailed it. So thank you so much. I adore you all. Can I tell you, I just found out officially today, I am officially a retiree of the White House Correspondents Association. How about that? So it feels weird to say, but it is so amazing to compare notes with all of you. I adore you all. Thank you for all that you do for the network and for the greater good in journalism. Appreciate you guys. All right.
Thanks.
Got to get to our last segment of the show. We could have done 45 minutes on that, but this is a really important story that we want to talk about here. It's a story that we've covered on the show. And it's about trans athletes, right? Specifically trans college athletes who are about to start competing with some new rules. Here's why. The NCAA just updated their policy to this sport-by-sport approach, trying to, in their words, balance fairness, inclusion, and safety for the athletes. It's a change from a policy that was first set in 2010 across all NCAA sports. Now, trans student athletes have to present sport-specific testosterone levels for a week before their sports championships, and then again 6 months later. And this announcement's coming at a really important time for trans athletes. There's been a lot of controversy around one UPenn athlete in particular, Lia Thomas. She's a trans swimmer who's recently been breaking all kinds of records. And while she's currently on the women's team this year, she's been on the men's team for the last 3. Joe Yerkeba joins us now. Joe, break this down, because this is essentially the NCAA saying, OK, we're going to punt and let you do it sport by sport. And some athletes and advocates are saying that is just confusing and not great.
Yeah, it's a really big deal, which is why people have a lot of different feelings about it. So the NCAA used to have a really clear across-the-board policy for all athletes in all sports, and now it's punted to these national and international sports governing bodies, some of which don't even have clear policies for trans athletes at all. And like you mentioned, the NCAA is going to require testosterone testing, which some prominent trans athletes have said will be nearly impossible for the association to implement and enforce. So there's just a lot of confusion and a lack of clarity right now. And all of this is also, in the middle of a season right before championships, which is also creating a lot of tension.
What does this mean for Lia Thomas, who we just mentioned?
So for Lia right now, it's unclear what this means. The NCAA, could have kept its previous policy, which Lia had met and surpassed. She said that she had undergone 2.5 years of testosterone suppression treatment by the time that she had started competing. But so right now, it's really unclear what this could mean for Lia. But one expert told me that she thinks it's unlikely to keep Lia from competing.
Where does this fight go next, Joe, right? Because I think there had been a sense, and you and I have talked about this, that maybe the NCAA would actually come down more on the side of, if you want to call it, sides of trans athletes to kind of send a message. Any chance they reverse this under pressure? What happens from here?
Yeah, it's unclear whether they could reverse it. I think advocates are, gearing up for this next legislative fight. Already, 15 states are considering bills that target trans people, and some of those do ban trans students, including in K through 12 schools, from competing on sports teams that align with their gender identity. So I think that trans athletes are hoping that policymakers will consult with them, within the NCAA and these other sports governing bodies, and consult with healthcare providers and their experts when they're crafting these policies in the future.
Joe Yerkeba, we really appreciate you joining us and staying on top of this story for us. I'm sure it is not the last time we'll talk about it. Thank you, and thanks to all of you for watching this hour. We're going to have a whole lot more for you here tomorrow. How many times a day do I say that? But it's true. It's going to happen. Same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.